2:14 in the morning. Subi Reef, the South China Sea. Lieutenant Chen sat in the cramped, air-conditioned darkness of the signals intelligence hub. His eyes were fixed on a monitor that should have been displaying nothing but the ambient electronic noise of the Spratly Islands. Instead, a high-frequency burst transmission was bleeding through the static. This was not a routine intercept. The signal used a rolling encryption key that the Chinese analysts had only identified 6 hours prior, yet the data packet contained a header that was impossible. The digital mission clock on the wall read 2:14 in the morning. The timestamp embedded in the American broadcast read 4:45 in the morning. It was an after-action report for a mission that was not scheduled to begin for another 2 hours. Chen adjusted his headset, feeling a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How could a United States command element broadcast the results of a raid that had not yet happened? The facility on Subi Reef was a jagged tooth of concrete and steel reclaimed from the ocean. It was designed to listen to the world, but tonight it was listening to a ghost. Chen signaled his superior officer. He did not speak. He simply pointed at the decrypted text scrolling across the secondary screen. It was a detailed list of casualties, tactical maneuvers, and fuel consumption rates. It even included the tail number of a specific transport aircraft currently sitting on a dark tarmac in Okinawa. 2:22 in the morning. The intercept continued. The voice on the recording was calm and professional. It belonged to a man identifying himself as Commander Miller. Call sign, Guardian 1. The recording described a chaotic extraction under heavy fire. Miller reported that the objective was secure, but mentioned the loss of 2 operators during the climb-out phase. He read their names aloud. He gave the exact coordinates where their helicopter had supposedly ditched into the sea. Lieutenant Chen looked at his own terminal. His screen showed the real-time movement of American assets in the region. According to the live radar feed, Commander Miller was currently located at a naval base in the Philippines. Sensors indicated he was stationary. Internal intelligence suggested he was likely finishing a late meal or sleeping. Yet, the voice in Chen's headset was unmistakably Miller's, filled with the specific fatigue of a man who had just survived a combat engagement. The unanswered question hung in the humid air of the tracking station. If this was a drill, the Americans were using names of real operators and providing coordinates for a crash that had not occurred. If it was a technical glitch, it was one that broke the laws of linear time. Chen's supervisor leaned over his shoulder. The older man's face was pale. He realized that if the coordinates in the broadcast were accurate, the United States was about to violate a sensitive maritime boundary in less than 90 minutes. 2:30 in the morning. Verify the source, the supervisor whispered. His voice was thin. Is this a playback of an old mission? Chen shook his head. Negative. The encryption is today's key. The tail number mentioned was only assigned to this theater 48 hours ago. This is not a recording of the past. It is a broadcast from the future. The supervisor reached for the secure line to the Northern Theater Command in Beijing. The strategic implications were staggering. If the Chinese military moved to intercept the mission now, they would be acting on information that had not been created yet. If they did nothing, they would allow a violation of their territory to occur exactly as the ghost broadcast predicted. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:35 in the morning. Northern Theater Command, Beijing. General Zhang stood before a floor-to-ceiling digital map of the Pacific. The air smelled of ozone and filtered oxygen. Behind him, rows of workstations hummed with the effort of dozens of analysts. The report from Subi Reef had bypassed 4 levels of command. It was now displayed on the main screen in the center of the room. The text was a transcript. It detailed the death of a man Zhang knew by reputation, Rear Admiral Thomas Vance. The transcript stated that Vance would die at 4:52 in the morning. According to the broadcast, his transport plane would be struck by a surface-to-air missile over the South China Sea. Zhang looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was not even 3 in the morning. Admiral Vance was currently attending a diplomatic function in Manila. He was very much alive. Is this a spoof? Zhang asked. His voice was a low growl. An intelligence officer stepped forward. Sir, we have analyzed the carrier wave. The signal is originating from a point in the Philippine Sea. There are no American ships at those coordinates. There is only open water. And the encryption? It is current. It is perfect. If this is a fake, it is the most sophisticated deception in the history of electronic warfare, but it contains data we should not possess. It lists the private medical records of the American operators. It mentions a specific fuel leak on a tanker that has not even launched yet. 3 in the morning. Zhang leaned over the console. He was a man of logic. He did not believe in ghosts or premonitions, but the data was staring back at him in cold, green text. If the Americans were planning a clandestine raid, they were going to pass through the Luzon Strait. They would do so in exactly 90 minutes. The general made a decision. He did not call the Americans to warn them. He did not call his own superiors for permission. He gave a single, sharp order. Launch the interceptors from Hainan Island. Tell the pilots to fly to the coordinates mentioned in the broadcast. They are to remain silent. They are not to engage. They are only to watch. I want to see if the future happens. Deep in the hardened hangars of Hainan, jet engines began to whine. Pilots climbed into their cockpits under the glare of floodlights. They did not know they were flying toward a ghost. They only knew they had a target. Across the water, on a darkened naval base in the Philippines, Commander Miller woke up. His alarm had not gone off yet. He felt a strange sense of dread. He looked at his hands in the dim light of the barracks. They were shaking. He did not know why. He reached for his secure phone on the nightstand. This is Guardian 1. Status check. The response from the operations center was immediate. All systems are green, Commander. We are on schedule for the 4 o'clock insertion. Miller frowned. The voice on the other end sounded different. It sounded like it was coming from a very long distance. It sounded like the voice he had just heard in a dream he could not quite remember. Back in the Beijing command center, the intelligence officer gasped. He was looking at the live feed of the incoming signal. "Sir," the officer said. "The broadcast. It is changing." "Explain." Zhang commanded. "The time of death for Admiral Vance. The timestamp just moved. It is now 4:41 in the morning. The future is arriving early. 3:15 in the morning. Basa Air Base, the Philippines. The MC-130J Combat Talon II sat on the darkened tarmac. Its engines were silent. Around it, the humid air of the jungle felt heavy and still. Commander Miller, call sign Guardian 1. Adjusted the straps on his tactical vest. He felt a strange weight on his shoulders. He had conducted hundreds of insertions. This mission felt different. His team moved with practiced efficiency around the aircraft. They checked their weapons in the dim red light of the cargo bay. They synced their digital watches. They did not speak. In the world of special operations, silence was the default state. Primary communications check, Miller said into his headset. Miller checked the digital display on his wrist. 3:21 in the morning. According to the mission plan, they would be wheels up in 39 minutes. The objective was a downed stealth drone that had crashed in a disputed sector of the South China Sea. The recovery was a high-priority task. The drone carried sensitive encryption hardware that could not fall into Chinese hands. Rear Admiral Thomas Vance walked across the tarmac toward the plane. He looked tired. He stopped in front of Miller. "Everything ready, Commander?" Vance asked. "Yes, sir." "We are on schedule," Miller replied. Vance nodded. He looked at the heavy transport aircraft. "Keep it clean. We do not need an international incident tonight. The political climate is brittle." Miller watched the Admiral walk back toward the command center. He noticed something small. Vance was walking with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Miller froze for a second. He remembered a fragment of the dream. He had moments before his alarm went off. In the dream, he had seen Vance falling. The Admiral had been clutching that same leg. 3:35 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the transport plane, the pilots began their pre-flight sequence. The glass displays flickered to life, casting a green glow on their flight suits. The navigation systems linked with the global positioning satellites. Guardian 1, this is flight lead. We have a minor technical issue, the pilot said over the internal loop. Miller keyed his radio. Report. Our primary encrypted channel is experiencing high levels of interference. We are switching to the backup rolling key. It was issued 6 hours ago. Miller felt a spike of adrenaline. Confirm. Switching now. The transition was seamless. For the American crew, it was a routine technical adjustment. They did not know that by switching to the backup key, they were aligning their broadcast perfectly with the intercept being analyzed on Subi Reef. They were now talking on the exact frequency that the Chinese were already monitoring for a future that had not happened. 3:45 in the morning. The rear ramp of the transport aircraft began to close. The hydraulics hissed in the darkness, sealing the team inside the pressurized cabin. Miller and his 12 operators sat in the red-lit interior. They checked the seals on their oxygen masks. This would be a high-altitude jump. 5 minutes to taxi, the loadmaster announced. Miller leaned his head back against the cold metal of the fuselage. He closed his eyes. He tried to shake the persistent feeling that he was following a script. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word felt like an echo. He checked his sidearm one last time. He did not know that 300 miles away, Chinese J-20 fighters were already climbing through 20,000 feet to meet him. He did not know that in a bunker in Beijing, his death had already been transcribed. The engines roared to life. The aircraft began to move. 3:15 in the morning. Besa Air Base, the Philippines. The MC-130J Combat Talon II sat on the darkened tarmac. Its engines were silent. Around it, the humid air of the jungle felt heavy and still. Commander Miller, call sign Guardian 1, adjusted the straps on his tactical vest. He felt a strange weight on his shoulders. He had conducted hundreds of insertions. This mission felt different. His team moved with practiced efficiency around the aircraft. They checked their weapons in the dim red light of the cargo bay. They synced their digital watches. They did not speak. In the world of special operations, silence was the default state. Primary communications check, Miller said into his headset. Loud and clear, Guardian 1. The radio operator replied. Miller checked the digital display on his wrist. 3:21 in the morning. According to the mission plan, they would be wheels up in 39 minutes. The objective was a downed stealth drone that had crashed in a disputed sector of the South China Sea. The recovery was a high-priority task. The drone carried sensitive encryption hardware that could not fall into Chinese hands. Rear Admiral Thomas Vance walked across the tarmac toward the plane. He looked tired. He stopped in front of Miller. Everything ready, Commander? Vance asked. Yes, sir. We are on schedule, Miller replied. Vance nodded. He looked at the heavy transport aircraft. Keep it clean. We do not need an international incident tonight. The political climate is brittle. Miller watched the Admiral walk back toward the command center. He noticed something small. Vance was walking with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Miller froze for a second. He remembered a fragment of the dream he had moments before his alarm went off. In the dream, he had seen Vance falling. The Admiral had been clutching that same leg. 3:35 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the transport plane, the pilots began their pre-flight sequence. The glass displays flickered to life, casting a green glow on their flight suits. The navigation systems linked with the global positioning satellites. Guardian 1. This is flight lead. We have a minor technical issue, the pilot said over the internal loop. Miller keyed his radio. Report. Our primary encrypted channel is experiencing high levels of interference. We are switching to the backup rolling key. It was issued 6 hours ago. Miller felt a spike of adrenaline. Confirm. Switching now. The transition was seamless. For the American crew, it was a routine technical adjustment. They did not know that by switching to the backup key, they were aligning their broadcast perfectly with the intercept being analyzed on Subi Reef. They were now talking on the exact frequency that the Chinese were already monitoring for a future that had not happened. 3:45 in the morning. sealing the team inside the pressurized cabin. Miller and his 12 operators sat in the red-lit interior. They checked the seals on their oxygen masks. This would be a high-altitude jump, 5 minutes to taxi, the loadmaster announced. Miller leaned his head back against the cold metal of the fuselage. He closed his eyes. He tried to shake the persistent feeling that he was following a script. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word felt like an echo. He checked his sidearm one last time. He did not know that 300 miles away, Chinese J-20 fighters were already climbing through 20,000 feet to meet him. He did not know that in a bunker in Beijing, his death had already been transcribed. The engines roared to life. The aircraft began to move. 4 in the morning, the Luzon Strait. A flight of 4 Chinese J-20 stealth fighters leveled off at 36,000 feet. The pilots flew in total radio silence. Their radars were in passive mode, searching for the whisper of an American electronic signature. The sky was a vast, empty bowl of black glass. Below them, the South China Sea was hidden by a layer of thin, high-altitude clouds. Inside the lead cockpit, the pilot checked his tactical display. The mission was unprecedented. He had been ordered to intercept a target that his sensors could not see. He was flying toward a set of coordinates provided by an intelligence intercept that was supposedly recorded 45 minutes in the future. It defied every rule of engagement he had ever learned. Yet, the voice of General Zhang in his headset had been cold and certain. 4:10 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Blue Ridge. The command ship of the American 7th Fleet hummed with the sound of high-powered servers. In the dimly lit center of the ship, a dozen analysts monitored the air picture. A young lieutenant pointed at a cluster of yellow icons on the main screen. "Sir, we have a massive surge in Chinese air activity out of Hainan Island. We are counting 16 separate tracks. They are moving at high speed toward the Luzon Strait." The watch officer stepped closer to the screen. "That is not a routine patrol. Those are intercept profiles." "What are they looking for?" "There are no American assets in that sector, sir. Except for the civilian corridor, that patch of ocean is empty." The watch officer looked at the digital clock. "I want to know if we have anything scheduled for that zone. Anything at all." The analyst shook his head. "The schedule is clear. But the Chinese are moving like they have a lock on something. They are not searching. They are intercepting." 4:15 in the morning. Inside the MC-130J, Commander Miller sat in the dark. The vibration of the 4 turboprop engines was a constant, low-frequency throb that he felt in his teeth. He checked his wrist display again. They were 10 minutes away from the drop zone. The mission was silent. They were flying low, hugging the wavetops to stay beneath the Chinese radar horizon. Guardian 1. "This is Flight Lead." The pilot's voice crackled in Miller's ear. "We are seeing some unusual activity on the long-range sweep. The Chinese are putting a lot of metal in the air. They are 500 miles north of us, but they are heading our way." Miller gripped the edge of his seat. "Do they have us?" "Negative. We are too low. They should not even know we are in the theater. But they are flying straight toward our planned extraction point. It is like they have our flight plan." Miller felt the cold knot in his stomach tighten. The extraction point was a secret. It had been decided by Admiral Vance and the mission planners in a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, less than 12 hours ago. It was not on any server. It was not on any network. 4:20 in the morning. In the Beijing Command Center, General Zhang watched the 2 sets of data converge. On the left screen was the live radar feed. On the right was the transcript from the future. The two were beginning to align with terrifying precision. "The American transport aircraft is now at the Luzon Strait," an analyst reported. "It is flying at 500 feet. Our interceptors are descending to meet it. The timing is exact." Zhang did not speak. He was watching the transcript scroll. It described a mid-air collision between a Chinese J-20 and an American transport. It listed the time as 4:41 in the morning. It was now only 21 minutes away. "Sir," the analyst whispered, "the American 7th Fleet is responding. They are launching F-35 fighters from the Carrier Strike Group. They think we are attacking." They do not know about the broadcast. The room went silent. Two of the most powerful militaries on Earth were now moving toward a collision because of a message that should not exist. The bridge between the present and the future was narrowing. "Get me a direct line to the American commander," Zhang said. "I do not care about the protocol. We have to tell them what we are hearing." "Sir, the Americans are refusing the link. They have gone to a high readiness state. Their systems are locking onto our pilots." The situation was no longer a mystery. It was a countdown. 4:30 in the morning. The Luzon Strait. The interior of the American transport plane was a vibration of dull red light and the smell of hydraulic fluid. Commander Miller checked the seal on his oxygen mask for the third time. He looked across the cargo bay at his team. They were shadows, silent, ready. He looked at the seat near the cockpit bulkhead. Rear Admiral Vance sat there, strapped in, his face obscured by a flight helmet. The Admiral had made a last-minute decision to join the flight to oversee the recovery personally. It was a breach of protocol that Miller had not expected. The pilot's voice broke the silence in Miller's ear. "Guardian 1, we have a problem. Multiple radar paints from the north. These are high-end fire control radars. The Chinese are not just looking for us. They have a solid track. We are being painted by at least 4 different platforms." Miller keyed his radio. "Are they in range for an engagement?" The pilot responded quickly. "They are inside 60 miles and closing at Mach 1.2. At this speed, they will be on us in less than 4 minutes. I am seeing F-35 signatures coming up from the south to intercept them. This sky is about to get very crowded." 4:40 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Blue Ridge, the atmosphere was electric with suppressed panic. The admiral in command of the 7th Fleet stared at the primary tactical plot. The yellow icons representing the Chinese J-20 fighters were now overlapping with the blue icons of the American strike group. "Sir, the Chinese-led pilot has just broken radio silence," a communications officer shouted. "He is broadcasting on the international emergency frequency. He is calling for Guardian 1 by name." The admiral turned. "By name? That mission is classified top secret. How does a Chinese pilot know that call sign?" "He is telling us to change our heading, sir. He is saying that if we do not turn to bearing 090 immediately, there will be a collision at 4:41. He is repeating the timestamp over and over. 4:41, 4:41. The admiral looked at the clock. It was 4:40 minutes and 20 seconds. That is 40 seconds from now. "Tell our pilots to maintain formation. Do not deviate. If the Chinese move to within 5 miles, they are cleared to engage." 4:41 in the morning. Inside the lead Chinese J-20, the pilot's hand was white on the flight stick. His head-up display showed the American transport aircraft rising out of the sea mist. It was exactly where the future transcript said it would be. According to the document in Beijing, this was the moment of the crash. This was the moment Rear Admiral Vance was supposed to die. The Chinese pilot looked at his sensors. He saw the American F-35 fighters diving toward him from the upper atmosphere. Their weapons bays were already opening. They were seconds away from firing. "I have the target," the Chinese pilot said into his mask. "I am not engaging. I am attempting to divert them. Guardian 1, break left. Break left now." Inside the MC-130J, Miller felt the aircraft bank hard. The pilot was ignoring the Chinese warning and following his own tactical computer. But the computer was glitching. The terrain-following radar was suddenly reporting a massive obstacle directly ahead that did not exist on any map. "Pull up!" Miller yelled, though he knew. The pilots could not hear him through the cargo bay wall. The transport plane groaned as it clawed for altitude. Outside the small porthole, Miller saw a flash of silver. A Chinese fighter roared past, so close, the turbulence shook. The heavy transport like a toy. The clock on Miller's wrist ticked to 4:41 and 5 seconds. 5 in the morning. The collision did not happen. The timestamp passed. The sky remained intact. But in the Beijing command center, General Zhang was not relieved. He was staring at the transcript again. The text was disappearing. The green letters were dissolving into static, replaced by a single line of text that repeated across every screen in the bunker. 5:10 in the morning. Both sides commit. Zhang looked at the radar feed. The American carrier strike group had just turned their radars to full power. They were no longer tracking. They were targeting. The American admiral on the Blue Ridge had reached his breaking point. He believed the Chinese maneuvers were a coordinated attempt to assassinate a high-ranking officer. All units, Zhang ordered, arm all surface-to-air batteries. If a single American missile is launched, we initiate a full response. We are no longer waiting for the future. We are making it. The tension had reached its limit. Both nations had committed their primary forces to a small patch of ocean. The mystery of the broadcast was now secondary to the reality of the weapons locks. 5:10 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Blue Ridge. The Admiral stared at the tactical display. Blue icons and yellow icons were overlapping. The air in the room was thick with the smell of cold sweat and recycled oxygen. He made his choice. He did not have time to wait for the Pentagon. He spoke into the fleet-wide circuit. His voice was flat. Professional. Final. Guardian. 1. This is Blue Ridge. You are cleared for defensive fire. All strike assets. Lock on and prepare to engage. 5:11 in the morning. Inside the lead J-20 fighter. The pilot's cockpit was a storm of electronic noise. The missile warning system was screaming. The American F-35 fighters had transitioned from tracking to targeting. They were hot. The pilot felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the American transport aircraft. It was so close, he could see the rivets on the wing. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to live. But his orders were absolute. He had to keep the Americans away from the coordinates in the broadcast. He armed his short-range missiles. 5:12 in the morning. The South China Sea. Commander Miller sat in the back of the transport. The red lights in the cabin were flickering. The plane was banking so hard he could feel his internal organs shifting. Outside the small window, the world was a blur of dark water and flashes of silver. The pilot's voice was a frantic shout in his ear. Guardian 1. We have multiple locks. They are going to fire. Everyone, brace. Miller gripped the seat handles. He looked at Admiral Vance. The Admiral was staring at the floor. He looked like a man who knew he was already dead. He looked like the man in the ghost broadcast. He was not moving. He was not even breathing. 5:13 in the morning. Subi Reef. Lieutenant Chen watched his screen. The signal was no longer a recording. It was a live feed of the chaos. He heard the screaming of the American pilots. He heard the calm, robotic voice of the Chinese flight computer. The encryption was breaking. The signal was expanding. It was no longer just on the American frequency. It was everywhere. It was on every civilian television in Manila. It was on every radio in Beijing. The world was listening to the beginning of a war in real time. 5:14 in the morning. Northern Theater Command. General Zhang stood frozen. He saw the American admiral's hand moving toward the fire command on the live video link. He saw his own pilots preparing to launch. The transcript in front of him changed one last time. It no longer described a collision. It described a global nuclear exchange. It described the end of the world in 12 minutes. Stop, Zhang whispered. But no one heard him. The machines were in control now. The logic of the weapon systems had taken over. 5:15 in the morning. The Luzon Strait. The first American pilot touched the trigger. The first Chinese pilot did the same. The computer systems on both sides reached the final stage of the firing sequence. The missiles were ready to leave their rails. The sensors were locked. The world was 1 second away from fire. 5:16 in the morning. The Luzon Strait. The American pilot in the lead F-35 squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. The missile did not leave the rail. The flight computer did not register a failure. The system simply refused to execute the command. 3 miles away, the Chinese pilot in the J-20 experienced the exact same phenomenon. His fingers pulled back on the launch stud, but his weapons remained cold. Every radio frequency in the theater was suddenly purged of static. The screaming alarms and the frantic chatter of the command centers vanished. In their place came a sound that was not human. It was a rhythmic, oscillating tone that vibrated through the hulls of the ships and the cockpits of the planes. It felt like a physical weight pressing against the eardrums of every sailor and pilot in the region. Then, a voice broke through the tone. It did not come from a radio. It seemed to originate from the air itself, inside every command center. It was a voice composed of 1,000 different layers. It spoke in English and Mandarin at the exact same time, the two languages overlapping in a perfect, terrifying harmony. Admiral Nelson, General Zhang, this engagement is terminated. 5:17 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Blue Ridge. The Admiral stood frozen. His hand was still hovering over the communications console. Every screen in the room had turned a brilliant, blinding white. The tactical plot was gone. The radar feeds were gone. He looked at his staff. They were all staring at the main display. The white light on the screen began to resolve into an image. It was not a map. It was a high-resolution, live feed of the moon. The image was so clear that the Admiral could see the jagged shadows of the lunar craters. In the center of the Mare Tranquillitatis, a structure was visible. It was a perfect black monolith, miles long, that had not been there during the last lunar survey. "Look at the moon," the voice repeated. It was no longer a command. It was an observation. 5:18 in the morning. Inside the MC-130J, Commander Miller unbuckled his harness and stood up. He moved to the small porthole on the side of the fuselage. He ignored the tactical situation. He ignored the threat of the Chinese interceptors. He looked up. High above the clouds, the moon was a pale sliver in the pre-dawn sky. As he watched, a beam of light, perfectly straight and impossibly thin, lances down from the lunar surface. It was a blue-white needle of energy. It struck the surface of the South China Sea exactly between the American carrier strike group and the Chinese fleet. The water did not splash. It did not boil. The beam simply carved a hole in the ocean. The air around the beam began to hum with static electricity. Every man on the plane felt their hair stand on end. The electronic systems of the transport plane did not just glitch, they reset. The red tactical lights went out, replaced by a soft, amber glow that the plane was not designed to produce. 5:19 in the morning. Northern Theater Command. General Zhang watched the satellite feed of the beam. He realized that the future broadcast had been a distraction. It was a lure designed to bring both fleets to this exact point at this exact moment. The American mission, the drone recovery, the Admiral's presence, all of it had been a catalyst. The transcript on his screen began to scroll again, but the letters were no longer green. They were a deep, pulsing violet. The text was no longer an after-action report. It was a set of instructions. "The Echo Protocol is active," the text read. "The timeline has been corrected. Both sides will disengage. The objective no longer exists in your reality." Zhang looked at the radar feed as it flickered back to life. The blue icons and the yellow icons were no longer overlapping. They were being pushed apart. A massive, invisible force was physically moving the ships and the aircraft, sliding them across the map like pieces on a board. The pilots reported that their flight controls were being overridden. They were not flying their planes. Something else was. Both fleets were being forced into a retreat that was as precise as it was absolute. The sky began to brighten with the first hints of the coming sun. But the beam of light from the moon did not fade. It grew stronger. 5:20 in the morning. The South China Sea. The USS Blue Ridge was no longer responding to its helm. On the bridge, the Admiral watched the digital compass spin in a slow, hypnotic circle. Outside, the ocean surface was eerily flat. Despite the massive displacement of the carrier strike group, every ship in the fleet was being moved. It was not a sudden jerk. It was a smooth, irresistible glide. The vessels were being pushed south, away from the Luzon Strait, at a constant speed of 20 knots. The Admiral turned to his tactical officer. "Report on the Chinese positions." The officer looked at a secondary screen that was still flickering with data. "Sir, the Chinese fleet is moving in the exact opposite direction. They are being pushed north toward Hainan. They are maintaining a perfectly symmetrical distance from us. It is like two magnets being forced apart. 5:25 in the morning. Inside the MC-130J, Commander Miller looked out the porthole at the beam of light. It was no longer a solid pillar. It was beginning to pulse. Each pulse sent a ripple through the air that Miller could feel in his marrow. The transport plane was flying at 300 knots, but the GPS indicated they were stationary over a single point in the ocean. The engines were screaming at full power, yet the clouds below were not moving. Guardian 1. This is flight lead, the pilot said. His voice was remarkably calm, filtered through the electronic dampening of the headset. We are in a hover. A fixed-wing aircraft is hovering at 10,000 feet. The flight computer says we are stalled, but we are not losing altitude. The laws of physics have left the building. Miller looked at Admiral Vance. The older man was no longer staring at the floor. He was looking at his own wrist display. The mission clock had stopped. The numbers were replaced by a countdown that was not synchronized with any human time zone. 5:30 in the morning. Northern Theater Command, Beijing. General Zhang stood before the violet-colored screens. The text was no longer transcribing military maneuvers. It was a list of names. Thousands of names. They were scrolling so fast they were a blur, but Zhang recognized the pattern. It was a census. It was a list of every human being currently within a 500-mile radius of the beam. His name was there. So was the name of the American admiral. "Sir," an analyst said, his voice trembling. "The intercept from Subi Reef has changed again. The audio is no longer Commander Miller. It is a recording of this room. Right now." Zhang listened. Through the speakers came the sound of his own breathing. Then, the voice of the analyst he had just heard. Then, the sound of the admiral on the Blue Ridge asking for a status report. The two command centers, separated by hundreds of miles of contested ocean and decades of geopolitical rivalry, were being merged into a single acoustic space. "Can they hear us?" Zhang asked. The answer came not from his analyst, but from the American admiral. The voice echoed in the Beijing bunker as clearly as if the man were standing in the room. "I can hear you, General," the admiral said. "My name is Nelson. I believe we are no longer the primary actors in this theater." 5:35 in the morning. The blue-white beam of light began to retract toward the moon. As it lifted, the hole in the ocean began to fill, but not with water. A dark, metallic shape rose from the depths. It was the size of a city block, triangular, and completely seamless. It was the drone the Americans had been sent to recover. But it was no longer a broken piece of hardware. It was glowing with the same violet light as the screens in Beijing. The object did not fly. It simply ceased to be in the water and appeared 2,000 feet higher in the air. Then it appeared higher still. Inside the transport plane, Miller watched the object ascend. He realized that the mission had never been about a crash. The crash had been a staged event to ensure that both nations would be present to witness the departure. 5:40 in the morning. The magnetic pressure pushing the fleets apart suddenly vanished. The ship settled back into the water with a heavy swell. The aircraft engines returned to normal operation. The silence that followed was more deafening than the oscillating tone. The sky was now a pale, pre-dawn gray. The moon was setting behind the horizon. The black monolith in the Mare Tranquillitatis was gone. The triangular object was gone. The only evidence that anything had happened was a circle of perfectly calm, still water in the center of the Luzon Strait. Admiral Nelson, General Zhang, said into the shared silence of the open channel, "What is the status of your mission?" There was a long pause. "The mission is scrubbed, General. We have nothing to recover." "Confirmed," Zhang replied. "We are returning to base. I suggest we keep this channel open for the duration of the transit." "Agreed," Nelson said. "There is much to discuss." The immediate threat of war had dissolved. In its place was a confusion so profound that neither side knew how to resume their roles as enemies. 6 in the morning. The South China Sea. The sun began to bleed over the eastern horizon. It turned the gray water into a sheet of hammered lead. The USS Blue Ridge was now 60 miles south of its original position. The Chinese fleet was an equal distance to the north. The ocean between them was empty. The silence on the radio was absolute. Commander Miller felt the wheels of the transport plane touch the tarmac. At Basa Air Base, the landing was hard. It was a physical reminder that he was back in a world governed by gravity and friction. The team did not move when the engines began to spool down. They sat in the dim amber light of the cargo bay. They looked at their hands. They looked at the floor. No one spoke. The adrenaline of the near collision had been replaced by a heavy, hollow exhaustion. Admiral Vance stood up. He did not look at Miller. He walked toward the cockpit bulkhead with a steady, certain gait. Miller watched him. The limp the Admiral had displayed only 3 hours ago was gone. His movements were fluid. He looked 20 years younger. 6:15 in the morning. Subi Reef Signals Intelligence Hub. Lieutenant Chen stared at his terminal. The Intercept was still there. It was a ghost in the machine that refused to be deleted. But the content had shifted once more. The military transcripts and the casualty lists had vanished. In their place was a single, rotating geometric shape. It was a complex polyhedron that seemed to fold into itself. Beside the shape, a new set of data points appeared. They were not military coordinates. They were astronomical. They pointed to a specific location in the asteroid belt. The signal is not originating from the future, Chen whispered to his supervisor. It is not a recording. It is a simulation that was being projected into our network. We were not listening to what would happen. We were listening to what the system was calculating. The supervisor leaned in close. A calculation of what? A calculation of our response, Chen said. It was testing us. It gave us a script of our own destruction to see if we would follow it to the end. When we chose to engage, it stepped in to prevent the result. 6:20 in the morning. Northern Theater Command, Beijing. General Zhang sat in his command chair. The violet light from the screens reflected in his eyes. He had kept the open channel to the American admiral. Neither man had spoken for 10 minutes. They were both listening to the hum of their respective command centers. Admiral Nelson, Zhang said, "My technicians have completed a preliminary scan of the lunar surface. The monolith we saw on the screen is gone. There is no physical trace left. But the gravitational sensors are still ringing. It is like a bell that has been struck." Nelson's voice came through the speaker. It sounded aged. "We have the same result, General. My science officer says the moon's mass increased by 0.001% for exactly 3 minutes. Then it returned to normal. That much mass does not just appear and disappear. Not in our version of physics. There is something else," Zhang said. "The voice. The one that spoke to us by name. We have analyzed the audio. It was a composite of our own voices. It used my vowels and your consonants. It was a mirror." 6:30 in the morning. In the Pentagon and the Great Hall of the People, the highest levels of government were beginning to react. Orders were being drafted. Security classifications were being raised to levels that had no names. But on the front lines, the mood was different. There was no sense of victory. There was only a profound, unsettling clarity. Commander Miller stepped off the ramp of the transport plane. The morning air was warm and smelled of salt and jet fuel. He looked up at the setting moon. It was a pale, harmless disk in the sky. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mission coin. He dropped it. The coin did not fall straight down. It drifted slightly to the left, hovering for a fraction of a second before hitting the concrete with a dull metallic clink. The mystery was no longer about who had sent the message. The mystery was about what had been changed in the process of delivering it. The world was safe from war, but it was no longer the world they remembered. 7 in the morning. Basa Air Base, the Philippines. The sun was high enough now to burn the morning mist off the runway. Commander Miller stood by the open rear ramp of the transport plane. He watched as a team of medical personnel approached. They were not moving with the usual urgency of a trauma team. They walked with a measured, almost hesitant pace. They had been told there were casualties. They had been told to expect the worst based on the early radio intercepts. Instead, they found 12 operators sitting in the shade of the wing, drinking water from plastic bottles. There was no blood. There were no bullet holes in the fuselage. There was only a profound, heavy silence. Guardian 1, a flight surgeon said, stepping up to Miller. "We were told you took heavy fire. We were told you lost 2 men." Miller looked at the surgeon. He looked at his two operators, the ones the future broadcast had named as dead. They were sitting 10 feet away, cleaning their optics. The report was inaccurate, Miller said. His voice felt like it belonged to someone else. We never reached the objective. We never engaged. The surgeon frowned, checking his tablet. That is not what the encrypted log says. I am looking at a signed casualty report from Admiral Vance. It was time-stamped 4:55 in the morning. It says you ditched in the sea. Miller turned to look for the Admiral. Vance was already 50 yards away, walking toward a waiting black sedan. He did not look back. He did not wave. He moved with the precision of a machine. Miller realized then that the Admiral was not going to a debriefing. He was leaving. 7:15 in the morning. Northern Theater Command, Beijing. General Zhang sat alone in his office. The main command floor was still a hive of activity, but the violet light on his private screens had faded back to a standard military blue. The Echo Protocol text was gone. Every file related to the intercept on Subi Reef had been overwritten with a series of zeros. It was a perfect, surgical data wipe. He picked up a secure handset and dialed a number that did not appear in any official directory. The event is concluded, Zhang said. A voice on the other end, distorted by layers of scramblers, responded immediately. And the outcome? The intervention was successful, Zhang replied. The conflict was avoided, but the tactical data suggests we are no longer the most advanced presence in the theater. Do the Americans know what we saw on the moon? They saw it, Zhang said. But their records will show a solar flare caused a mass sensor malfunction. Our records will say the same. We have agreed to a mutual denial. It is the only way to maintain the current order. 7:30 in the morning. In the South China Sea, the USS Blue Ridge resumed its steady patrol. The sailors on deck looked at the water. It was blue and deep and gave up no secrets. The circle of still water where the beam had struck was gone, erased by the natural rhythm of the tide. Inside the Combat Information Center, the analysts were busy recalibrating their systems. They found that every digital clock in the fleet was exactly 3 seconds ahead of the global atomic standard. It was a minor discrepancy. Most ignored it. But for those who had been watching the screens at 5:16 in the morning, those 3 seconds felt like a lifetime. Miller walked toward the barracks. He felt a vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his encrypted mission phone. There was a single new message. It had no sender. It had no subject. The message was a single line of text. The simulation has been updated. Do not deviate from the new coordinates. Miller looked up at the sky. The moon was gone, hidden by the brightness of the day, but he knew it was still there. He knew that somewhere, something was still calculating. The crisis was over. The war had been stopped. But the professionalism of the soldiers and the sailors was now a thin mask over a new and terrifying reality. They were not the masters of the Pacific. They were just the variables in someone else's equation. 3 days later, 9:15 in the morning. The Pentagon, Washington. In a windowless briefing room deep within the E-ring, a group of senior analysts sat in total silence. They were reviewing the black box data from the MC-130J. The audio from the flight deck was being played alongside the Intercept from Subi Reef. The two recordings were identical, but they were offset by exactly 2 hours and 31 minutes. The lead analyst, a woman who had spent 20 years studying Chinese electronic warfare, tapped a pen against the mahogany table. She looked at the transcript. The future broadcast was a perfect acoustic and digital match for the real-time communications of Commander Miller. But the recording from Subi Reef contained sounds that the aircraft's own cockpit voice recorder had not picked up. It contained the sound of a heavy, rhythmic breathing that did not match any of the crew. It was not a recording of a mission, the analyst said to the assembled generals. It was a blueprint. The signal was a broadcast of the most probable outcome. Every tactical decision made by the Chinese and American commanders during the crisis was a direct response to that broadcast. We were trapped in a feedback loop. One of the generals leaned forward. And the source? Was it a Chinese cyber attack? The analyst shook her head. No, sir. We have traced the signal's carrier wave. It did not originate from Hainan or any known Chinese facility. It was a high-frequency burst that originated from a point in space, precisely 64,000 miles above the lunar surface. It was not a transmission. It was a reflection. 2 in the afternoon. Beijing, the Ministry of State Security. General Zhang stood by a window overlooking the city. On his desk was a report from the physical examinations of the pilots who had flown the J-20 fighters. All 4 men were in perfect health, but their short-term memory of the event was degrading. They could remember the takeoff and the landing, but the 60 seconds when their weapon systems refused to fire were a blank space. It was as if that minute of time had been surgically removed from their consciousness. His chief of intelligence entered the room. "Sir, we have completed the forensic audit of the Subi Reef server. The Echo protocol was not a program. It was a signature. It is a mathematical constant found in the background radiation of the lunar surface. Someone, or something, used our own communication infrastructure as a speaker." Zhang did not turn around. "And the American Admiral, Vance? He has been relocated to a secure facility in Hawaii," the officer replied. "The Americans are claiming he suffered a minor stroke during the flight. But our satellite surveillance of his transport showed him walking unaided. He looked different. His thermal signature was 3 degrees lower than a standard human baseline." 5:30 in the afternoon. Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Hawaii. Commander Miller sat in a small, sterile room. He had been through 12 hours of questioning. They had asked him about the beam of light. They had asked him about the triangular object. Most of all, they had asked him about Admiral Vance. Miller looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. He knew they were watching him from the other side of the glass. He knew they wanted him to say it was all a Chinese trick, a hallucination caused by some new electronic weapon. "I saw him," Miller said to the empty room. "After the beam hit, I saw the Admiral. He wasn't looking at the mission clock. He was looking at us like he was seeing us for the first time. Like we were a species he was studying in a lab. He didn't have a limp anymore because he didn't remember he was supposed to have one." Miller paused. He thought about the message on his phone, the one about the simulation being updated. He had not told the investigators about that. He had deleted it, but he could still see the violet letters in his mind. "We think we stopped a war," Miller continued, "but we didn't. We just failed the first test. The broadcast wasn't a warning for us. It was a notification for whatever is out there. It was a signal that the 2 most powerful nations on Earth are finally listening." The room remained silent. Outside, the sun began to set over the Pacific. The tactical analysis was clear. Both nations had retreated. Both nations had survived. But the strategic reality had shifted. The South China Sea was no longer a chessboard for 2 players. A third player had moved a piece, and neither Washington nor Beijing knew whose turn it was next. 7 days later. The United States Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island. The atmosphere in the secure auditorium was heavy, with a silence that no one wanted to break. On the screen was a final, consolidated report on what the intelligence community had dubbed the Luzon incident. The document did not mention electronic warfare. It did not mention Chinese aggression. It was titled Strategic Assessment of Non-Terrestrial Intervention. The lead strategist stood at the podium. He did not look at his notes. The event lasted exactly 32 minutes. In that window, 2 of the most advanced military structures on this planet were rendered completely obsolete. Our encryption was used against us. Our weapons were remotely deactivated. Our command structures were bypassed by a broadcast that appeared to originate from the future. He paused, looking out at the rows of high-ranking officers. "We have concluded that the broadcast was not a message. It was a constraint. The entity on the moon did not just stop a war. It edited the reality of the theater to ensure the conflict became impossible. It manipulated our perceptions, our sensors, and the very flow of time within a 500-mile radius." 2 in the afternoon. Beijing. The Academy of Military Science. General Zhang sat in the back of a similar auditorium. He listened as a physicist explained the 3-second gap. Every digital device that had been within the zone of the beam was now permanently out of sync with the rest of the world. No matter how many times they were reset, they drifted forward by 3 seconds every hour. It is a signature, the physicist said, like a mark left by a tool. Whatever changed the Luzon Strait left a footprint in our local space-time. We are now living in a world that is slightly out of alignment with the one we inhabited before the Intercept. Zhang thought about Admiral Vance, for health reasons 48 hours after the flight. He had vanished from public life, but Zhang had seen the classified surveillance photos. Vance was last seen at a remote observatory in Chile. He was not looking through the telescope. He was standing on the roof, staring at the empty sky with an expression of recognition. 6 in the evening, Coronado, California. Commander Miller sat on the beach, watching the Pacific. The water was dark and restless. He had been given a mandatory 30-day leave. His team was scattered across different bases, undergoing psychological evaluations that they all knew were a formality. They had been told never to speak of the beam. They had been told the broadcast was a sophisticated Chinese deepfake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mission phone. It was dead. It had been bricked by the security teams at Pearl Harbor. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first sliver of the moon appeared, the screen flickered to life. There was no logo, no battery indicator, just a single, scrolling line of violet text. The coordinates have been verified. The next window opens in 364 days. Maintain readiness. Guardian 1. Miller did not feel fear. He felt a strange, cold sense of purpose. He realized that the professionalism he had cultivated over 20 years was exactly what the observer wanted. They did not need heroes. They did not need villains. They needed disciplined actors who could follow a script without question. The United States and China were already moving back toward their traditional positions. New carrier groups were being deployed. New missile batteries were being installed. To the public, the tension in the South China Sea was as high as ever. But in the quiet rooms of the Pentagon and the Great Hall of the People, the generals knew the truth. They were no longer preparing for a war against each other. They were preparing for the day the broadcast returned. They were a world of children who had just realized the house was not empty. The moon rose higher, a silent, white observer in the black velvet of the night. It looked exactly as it had for 1 billion years. But beneath its craters, the monolith was still there. The Echo protocol was still active. The simulation was running. Modern warfare was no longer decided by who fired first. It was decided by who was allowed to fire at all. And the master of that decision was no longer human.